Dad, this is my boyfriend Jackson. The words slipped out of my mouth, tumbling over themselves, heart racing as if it were about to burst. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times, imagining different reactions, but nothing could have prepared me for the look on his face. I turned to see my dad's jaw drop and his lip curl into a tight, disapproving frown. Jackson, standing beside me, kept a firm grip on my hand, offering me what little comfort he could. I needed him right now more than ever. Dad, did you hear me? I repeated, hoping for any sign that he had heard the words I had finally been brave enough to speak. I heard you all right, he muttered gruffly. His gaze shifted from me to Jackson, narrowing with a fierceness I hadn't expected. So that's why you didn't tell me what kind of person you were bringing home. I wasn't prepared for the sting of his words. The bitter animosity in his voice felt like it could have cut through me. My mind went blank for a moment. I wasn't sure how to respond, but I could feel Jackson's fingers tighten around mine, offering silent support. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, my voice shaking a little. I just didn't know how to bring it up. Believe me, I never wanted to surprise you like this. Oh, you've said everything now, he snapped. I'm not surprised. You've always been one of those people. The weight of his words hit me like a punch in the gut. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Did he mean I was one of those people just because I was gay? I looked at Jackson, who was standing silently beside me, his eyes soft, but there was a quiet intensity in his stance. This wasn't the reaction I'd been hoping for. I'm sorry, but what do you mean by that? I asked, my voice low, but I couldn't hide the hurt from my tone. I mean, you're gay, Ethan, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I didn't raise you to be like this. I don't even know how to handle it. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. The conversation was spiraling quickly, and I didn't know how to control it anymore. Dad, it's not like I can help it, I said, my voice trembling. I've never had a girlfriend, and it's not like I didn't try, but I realized I wasn't into girls. Is that supposed to make this better? He asked, his voice rising in anger. I thought you were bringing a girlfriend home to meet me, not this. This isn't how things are supposed to be. I'm not ruining anything, I replied, my voice growing firmer despite the knot of anxiety that was tightening in my chest. I thought you'd understand. Or at least, I thought you'd try. Dad stood up abruptly, his hand rubbing his temples in frustration. I didn't raise you to turn out like this, Ethan. I raised you to bring home grandchildren. And now, this. You expect me to just accept it? The words stung worse than any slap could have. I opened my mouth to say something, but the anger I was feeling started to choke my voice. All I had ever wanted was for him to see that I had found someone who made me happy, someone who truly understood me. But instead, I was being met with disdain and resentment. I thought you'd be proud of me, Dad, I whispered. You've always told me to find happiness, but now that I've found it, you can't accept it. I can't deal with this right now, he muttered, turning towards the door. I need space. You and your friend can just stay in your room. I'll figure this out later. Jackson's grip on my hand loosened, but his presence next to me was still a comfort. I watched as Dad stormed out onto the patio, the door slamming behind him with a finality that left my chest hollow. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to Jackson, my mind reeling. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I said, the words coming out almost as a whisper. I'm happy. I know, Ethan, Jackson said softly. It's not easy. But he's your dad. That's a hard conversation to have. He needs time to process this. I nodded, even though the weight of my dad's rejection still hung heavy on my chest. I thought things would be different. I really did. Jackson smiled, though it was a little sad. It's okay, babe. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone. I sighed, leaning into Jackson's warmth. I didn't want to be alone in this moment. The idea of facing my dad's anger alone terrified me. But with Jackson by my side, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could face whatever came next. We spent the rest of the evening in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. I was glad to have Jackson there, even if things weren't exactly going smoothly. I needed him, and that was something I had learned to accept. There was no turning back now. I had come out to my dad, and all I could do now was hope that time would heal whatever had been broken. The days after my conversation with Dad were tense, to say the least. The house, once filled with the hum of our daily routine, felt eerily quiet. Dad barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were short, distant. Jackson was a rock beside me, a constant source of comfort, but even his presence couldn't fully erase the ache in my chest. One evening, about a week after the big conversation, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring out into the evening sky. It was quiet, and the air was cool, but the stillness around me didn't ease the storm inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same between my dad and me. Every time I walked past him, I felt a new wall between us. Jackson had stepped out for a bit, and the house was emptier without him. I took a deep breath and walked inside, hoping to find some distraction. But as soon as I opened the door, I froze. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, a piece of paper in front of him. His expression was unreadable, his fingers absently tracing the edges of the paper. He didn't look up when I entered, but there was a slight shift in his posture, like he knew I was there. "Dad?" I said softly, trying to keep the uncertainty out of my voice. "What's that?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. It was as if he was weighing something his thoughts, his next words before he finally sighed and lifted his gaze to meet mine. "Your mother used to have a friend," he said quietly, setting the paper down between us. "A man. They were close when they were young before she met me." I blinked, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What does that have to do with anything, Dad?" He paused, looking at me as if measuring the weight of his next words. He wasn't exactly like other people. He was different. And your mom never told me much about him, but she always spoke of him with a certain kind of sadness. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. "Dad, what are you trying to say?" He took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "Your mom always said that the world wasn't as simple as people like to make it. She said there were things that had to be accepted, even when they were hard to understand." I swallowed hard, the pieces starting to fall into place. "Are you telling me that she?" He nodded slowly, his face tightening with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. "Your mom wasn't just a woman with a past, Ethan. She had a side of herself that she never fully explained to me. But I've had time to think about it since you came out. She was always trying to tell me something without actually saying it." I stood there, shocked. My mom had always been so supportive of everything I did, but this was something entirely new. I didn't know how to react to the idea that there had been so many unspoken layers in her life, so many things she had never shared with me. "Are you saying that she?" "Ethan," Dad interrupted gently, his tone softer now. "She never told me she was gay. I don't know if she ever really realized it herself. But I think, deep down, she knew. And I think she wanted me to understand it." A wave of confusion swept over me. "So you're telling me that she was like me?" He nodded. "I think so, but I don't know. All I know is that she was trying to teach me something by keeping quiet. I've been thinking about it a lot, and now that you're here, I don't want to repeat the same mistakes." The silence in the room was thick, the weight of my father's words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I felt a sudden pang of loss, a deep ache for the mother I had lost all those years ago, and the mother I never truly understood. "Dad," I said after a long pause, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you mean to say that you're starting to understand me?" Dad didn't look at me immediately. His eyes were focused on the paper, but his expression was different now, softer, almost apologetic. Finally, he turned to face me fully, his gaze meeting mine with a newfound sincerity. "I think I've been wrong, Ethan," he said quietly. "I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. But I'm willing to try to understand you. And Jackson, I don't want to lose you, not over this." My heart skipped a beat. "So you're saying you'll try?" "I'm saying that I don't want to repeat my mistakes," he replied, standing up and walking over to me. "I've spent too many years being stubborn, holding on to things I didn't understand. But now I see things differently. I'll try. I just don't know how long it'll take." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, though I knew it wasn't going to be easy. "Thank you, Dad." He nodded, a small, uncertain smile tugging at his lips. I can't promise it'll be perfect, but I'll try. As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. This wasn't the perfect resolution I had imagined, but it was a start, a real, honest attempt at bridging the gap between us. Jackson returned later that night, and I told him everything. He listened carefully, never interrupting, his hand resting gently on my knee as I spoke. When I finished, he simply nodded. You know, he said softly, this doesn't make everything perfect, but it's a huge step, Ethan. A huge step. I smiled, feeling his warmth envelop me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. Jackson had always been there for me, and now maybe, just maybe me dad was starting to be there too. And that was enough. For now, it was enough.